Hello, you wonderful people out there. Today I was in Washington, D.C., and I went on The Hill, the online video show called The Rising, which many of you are probably aware of. And I did two segments with Cigar and Crystal. And I'm just going to put them both here in the same video because why the hell not? The first was with me alone, where we discussed my apprehension about impeachment, and the second was a debate-style format with a Democratic strategist. It was actually the first segment that they've done that is framed around a debate of sorts, and they're going to do more of those in the future, so I was very honored to be the inaugural guest for that. Now, you should also subscribe to their YouTube channel. I will include the link in the description box. They just passed 100,000 subscribers, which was very fortuitous for me because it meant that they were having a breakfast celebration and I got some free food. So I'm going to try to schedule my forthcoming appearances around when they reach a YouTube milestone, purely because it provides me with nourishment, literally. So here you go.
A second intelligence official is considering filing a whistleblower complaint in response to the actions of President Donald Trump. According to the lawyer representing the first whistleblower, the latest complainant has made a protected disclosure to the Inspector General, making him or her a whistleblower under the law.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has missed a deadline to turn over documents related to the July phone call between President Trump and the newly elected president of Ukraine, which has triggered the official impeachment inquiry. Joining us to discuss his thoughts on all of this is the journalist Tracey, friend of the show. Mike, welcome back.
Great
Hello,
to
friends.
see you in person.
I know.
Yeah.
I exist in real life.
Not on a blurry Skype screen.
Yeah.
Michael, you've been critical of Democrats for going all in, trying to impeach the president based on this. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, I think Democrats have failed to appreciate the scale of the failure that they presided over with regard to the Russia investigation and Mueller. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. It was only a couple of months ago that was heralded as the smoking gun that would take down Trump. And we have all the central actors who basically orchestrated that failure now taking up the mantle of Ukraine-gate, and they wonder why people have sort of ingrained skepticism about their political motives or whether they're following the logic to its fullest fruition in this new saga. I mean, Adam Schiff, run the highlight reel of him making all these grandiose, preposterous claims about what Russia and Mueller would culminate in. I mean, you've talked about this with regard to how MSNBC treated the issue. There's nobody who has put it on a bigger pedestal than Adam Schiff.
Right.
And so for now him to be at the center of this latest controversy, I think rightly provokes some consternation as to whether he can be trusted to navigate the intricacies of this process. And then on top of that, Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, I generally do not like him, but it's pretty indisputable that since before he assumed office, you've had pretty out there machinations against him on the part of the national security state apparatus, whether it's the CIA, the FBI, arguably the NSA, and again, that was even before he took office, and it's continued till now, where you have the complaint from the whistleblower originating seemingly in the CIA, and not just some kind of low-level CIA lackey who's like, who's like in the broom closet or something, but somebody who has a detail at the White House and was able to work in concert with unnamed White House officials to formulate the kind of narrative around the complaint. So if you have worries about the national security state apparatus acting with quasi-autonomy to override democratic will, then it shouldn't matter whether or not you personally like Trump. You can still want him removed, yet have reservations about the ways in which these security state officials have been leveraged as the chief way to oppose Trump.
I think that's such an important point, that there's a lot more sort of palace intrigue going on here than just, oh, this is a whistleblower, a national hero, like let's just lionize them. And my other piece with this is, look, I think what Trump did on that phone call was bad, right? With the Ukraine, like, I don't think you should be holding up military aid to encourage an ally to go after your political opponent. But I think it's very telling what we believe, what Democrats believe is cause for impeachment and not, right? For example, this president has enabled a massive humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Democrats seem less concerned about that than him digging up dirt on Joe Biden. George W. Bush lied to get the nation into war. Hundreds of thousands of people killed. An insane amount of money spent, and presided over a regime of torture. We didn't even investigate that, let alone impeach him over it.
Right.
So when Americans look at this and say, okay, suddenly now that it's going after one of your guys, once it's challenging another elite institution, that's where you draw the line, I just find that hard to take.
Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House beginning in 2007 for her first go-around, and there was a small but vocal minority of Democrats who wanted to begin an impeachment inquiry, if that's what we're calling it now, against Bush and Cheney because of their manipulation of intelligence that precipitated the Iraq War. And you can go back, I look at this recently, Nancy Pelosi was on 60 Minutes and she was asked, I believe by Leslie Stahl, what are you going to do with regard to these calls for impeachment? And she said that would be a waste of time.
Wow.
To even consider or contemplate impeachment with respect to the Iraq War. So when you look at that, I mean, that's not ancient history, it was 2006.
Right, and she, like then, was in charge.
Right, and she was in the same position that she's in now. And you have to wonder, why is it that this became such an immediate priority for Democrats in contrast with the whole host of other issues that Trump could potentially, or any other president really, could be potentially investigated and impeached on, whether it's, illegal surveillance, illegal wars, all manner of civil liberties violations. It doesn't get into their consciousness in the way that this did, and you have to wonder why. Does it have to do with the fact that there was a kind of cadre of elites who kind of, I'm not going to say conspired, but at least coordinated or orchestrated amongst themselves to foist this upon the public in a way that warrants some skepticism.
That's the point that you're making, which is, look, this happened to Trump, but like if progressives think that a similar an anti-establishment president is going to take the helm and not face massive backlash within the state, you have another thing coming. I mean, these people are entrenched. The multiple whistleblowers now, I've seen these reports circulating online, multiple whistleblowers now, thinking about coming forward. I mean, you have literally elements of the security state thinking about taking information that is inside that apparatus, weaponizing it and using it to the impeachment advantage. I mean, what other word do we have for that? Like, if this were happening in Turkey, we would be like, this is a coup. This is a security state trying to take out the president or the duly elected leader. This is undemocratic behavior fundamentally, and anybody who is anti-establishment should be very worried about this.
Right, because what you're doing is you're enshrining a precedent where this is seen as legitimate behavior on the part of the security state.
Right.
Right, and that should be troubling irrespective of who the president happens to be, because if it's somebody who I may agree with more, who occupies the Oval Office, now these CIA and FBI officials and other members of other agencies can refer to what happened here if it's actually carried out to fruition and say it's been done before, it can be done now, and even if the grounds are spurious, even if there's some dubious aspects to how it all came about, now the government acts on precedent. I mean, it's not just a judicial thing. We're talking about Watergate now because it serves as sort of like the theoretical precedent for what is being undertaken currently. And that's what's being done. And my problem, one of them, is that it's been given license, especially by progressives, who put at front of mind solely, take down Trump, come what may. And they don't think about the broader implications of what is the most convenient mechanism by which you take down Trump, what it might be doing to the body politic in a way that's really troubling.
But even that, even if your goal is just take down Trump, this seems like a catastrophically stupid way of going about it. I mean, look, the guy is great in a fight. Right? And Democrats have decided to die on the hill of his corruption is illegal and ours is totally fine. Right? So Joe Biden, and we've got a clip from him responding, look, what Hunter Biden sitting on the board of Burisma making $50K, yeah, that's probably legal. But are Americans okay? Are we okay with the fact that the son of the sitting vice president who has Ukraine in his portfolio is sitting on this board cashing in on his access to the vice president? I think the overwhelming majority of Americans would say, no, that's disgusting. That's part of why we are so disgusted with Washington. And let's take a listen to how the vice president is attempting to respond to this.
How is your role as vice president in charge of policy in Ukraine and your son's job in Ukraine? How is that not a conflict of interest?
It's not a conflict of interest. There's been no indication of any conflict of interest from Ukraine or anywhere else. Period. I'm not going to respond to that. Let's focus on the problem. Focus on this man, what he's doing that no president has ever done. No president.
And again, Michael, what Trump did is not okay. But to say there's no conflict of interest, like him sitting on the board when you're vice president and overseeing the Ukraine policy, that is like the definition of a conflict of interest.
Doesn't Trump do like 10 million things a day that are not okay?
Of course.
Right.
Like, so why is this one singularly impeachable? Right? I think one of the fallacies here, and I almost feel bad watching that Joe Biden clip. It's almost, you have to take pity on him in a sick way, given his obvious incapacities. But one thing that Democrats are trying to suggest is that this episode is so aberrational and so singularly damning that it warrants impeachment. And I don't know that people are necessarily going to buy that. I know it might sound like a right-wing talking point, but what was the Steele dossier if not an attempt to leverage the political power of a major figure, in that case Hillary Clinton? I'm not trying to do whataboutism. I'm trying to isolate what the principle is here that we're supposed to believe warrants the impeachment of a president, which is the most dramatic step you can take constitutionally within our system. So if the idea is that soliciting foreign assistance to further your political ends is itself wrong and evil and impeachable, then, I mean, the Steele dossier was exactly that, in that they did it less overtly, right? So Trump just goes on the phone and blurts out, hey, maybe it would be a good idea to investigate Biden, and then releases a transcript. So he's more blatant and ostentatious about it.
And Hillary Clinton didn't have the, the power of the state and the ability to withhold military aid and those sort of levers of power to pull.
Well, she had a lever of power to pull in the sense that she was expected to win the presidency, and therefore garnering influence with her was going to be advantageous to whoever could provide something of value to her.
Well, we have to leave it there, Michael, unfortunately, but thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting.
Thank you, Michael. Great to see you in person.
Thanks.
Next on Rising, for the 6th year in a row, the life expectancy rate in Missouri has dropped to record lows.
Journalist Charles Lehman describes how it represents a growing amount of deaths of despair across the country when Rising continues. Since House Speaker Nancy Pelosi formally announced an impeachment inquiry, the president has seen a roughly 2-point drop in his approval rating.
According to 538, while 2 points is not a lot of movement, the shift is notable because of his consistently stable numbers. Joining us to debate the merits of impeachment, the impact it could have on the 2020 election, Democratic strategist Don Calloway and journalist Michael Tracey, both friends of the show. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for having us.
Gentlemen.
So this is an interesting new segment that we're trying out here. It's a little bit of a debate between somebody who supports impeachment, somebody who does not. Michael, I think we'll begin with you on why you generally don't think this is a good idea for Democrats, both on its merits and politically.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of moving parts here, so it's a bit of a challenge to kind of figure out what to begin with. But what I think is worth beginning with is the political rhetoric that Democrats have used to justify their very swift and almost sudden overnight transition into an impeachment posture. So if you look at what Nancy Pelosi said when she announced that this inquiry was beginning, she said something to the effect of that Trump betrayed the country. And you hear that talking point repeated across the board. Even somebody like AOC is saying that Trump betrayed the country. I don't know how many people out there in the heartland really take it seriously if they see Nancy Pelosi and AOC employing this kind of like pseudo-jingoistic rhetoric to suggest that Trump is not sufficiently patriotic. I don't know that's the strongest point that Democrats could wield against Trump. And if that becomes at the center of the discussion, I think Democrats open themselves up to accusations of hypocrisy or, just kind of posturing, and it's a can of worms that I think probably could backfire on them. So that's the strategic aspect. On a substantive level, and these are sort of like distinct arguments, but on a substantive level, and we mentioned this in an earlier segment, I think the notion that this is impeachable, meaning the Ukraine phone call and the subsequent issues attendant to that, the notion that that's impeachable, I think, hinges on whether the episode involving the phone call was singularly unethical.
Yes.
in the sense that it would have to be something that you really have no precedent for. It's a high crime in that it's a unique and isolated incident. And I think that there's just very much reason to believe that Republicans, although they're doing it from a reflexive partisan standpoint, obviously, they're going to be able to reference incidents in the past where other countries did, quote unquote, interfere. I almost think that this hysteria over the notion of foreign interference is itself overblown. Like, I don't know that there's anything, I don't know that anybody has interrogated the premise that accepting foreign interference is in every case wrong or illegal, which it's not. I mean, they're actually, if you look at the FEC code, foreign nationals can volunteer for presidential campaigns. Right, so they can't receive compensation, but they can do things that constitutes "quote unquote" something of value in service of a domestic political campaign. But that's sort of a side issue. But is what Trump did singularly unethical or wrong? I don't know. I think that's up for at least dispute, because Republicans have been saying this on the talk shows and et cetera, but it is true that the DNC dispatched an agent to Ukraine to dig up "quote unquote" dirt on Manafort for the explicit purpose of helping Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And a Ukraine court ruled that what happened in 2016 vis-a-vis Ukraine and the Clinton campaign constituted meddling. So it's not a conspiracy theory to point at that necessarily if you have an officially constituted court in Ukraine ruling that it constituted meddling. And that, I think, weighs against the notion that what Trump did here, as unethical and sleazy and wrong-headed as it was, is enough of a singularly damning episode that it would justify launching the country into this months-long drama that is going to subsume every political discussion into a very binary choice of impeach or don't impeach, and drown out a huge range of other issues that might otherwise be at the forefront of the public discussion.
Don? So, Don, why do you believe both that this is a strategically wise move for the Democrats and sort of morally and ethically strong place to stand?
Well, that was wide-ranging, first of all. So
I'll take that as a compliment.
It's substance.
Touched a lot of stuff there. So we can look at this as the political ramifications of it, first of all, right? So if you impeach, and history, particularly with the Nixon episode, shows that impeachment, I know that he resigned before he was formally impeached, but impeachment gives the Democratic Party the opportunity to explain book, chapter, and verse every day to the American people. If we're able to remove ourselves from the furor and kind of the uproar of our partisanship, it gives the Democratic caucus a platform every day to explain to the American people approaching an election very specifically what the president did, why it was wrong, and what the greater implications and ramifications are for our country, for our national security, for national pride, jingoism, all the above. So impeachment provides you a very unique platform to lay out the case as you're approaching an election. And I think that some Democrats politically are approaching it the exact opposite, that impeachment means we lose these seats that are in these purple districts or these marginal, even red districts. And I think that the opposite can be argued, is that impeachment gives you the opportunity to lay out the indictment. I think that morally, if you do not impeach this president, you have set a historical, and I know this sounds cliche, but you have set a historical precedent for non-accountability going forward. I don't think that there's any argument that what this president did, and frankly, not only on the Ukraine call, but has done, how he has conducted his presidency, has been historically anywhere from corrupt at worst to entirely questionable on his very best day. He is an entirely inappropriate, entirely questionable president. But if you limit our discussions to the Ukraine call, what we have here, first of all, I don't know that it matters that it is not a singularly unique thing in the course of American history, because whatever Hillary did, and let's just take what you said to be the entire truth, she was not, the president. Yeah. So that doesn't really, matter too much for the course of this discussion. But the question is this conduct acceptable for a president? And going forward, if you have, and he talked about China on the South Lawn. He's talked about the Prime Minister of Australia and having them investigate as well. But the Ukraine situation is unique because it is specifically invoking a quid pro quo for military funding that was bipartisanly approved by Congress. We've never had that as a situation. Again, and I think, I used to practice law, so I think you have to look at this as a legal matter. Is this a chargeable crime? That's essentially what impeachment is. And let the Senate, partisan as we know it will be the finder of fact. Let them convict or not. But is this a chargeable crime? I don't think that there's any doubt that we've reached the threshold where we could say, if this was a prosecutor, should he be indicted for this and have to stand trial and explain these actions? I think that we've reached that place. So if you don't do that, then we've essentially cut the floor out. There is no floor on presidential conduct, particularly when it comes to foreign entanglements.
Is there, though, is that the standard, that this is an indictable crime? Is that the standard that should be used for high crimes and misdemeanors?
No, I don't think that is the standard because the Constitution doesn't even define what a high crime misdemeanor is. It leaves it open to interpretation, which is why the cliche that people have been reciting, rightly, but you have self-anointed constitutional scholars now clarifying that impeachment is a political process, not a strictly legalistic process. So I don't think that you can necessarily look at it through that narrow prism where it's just a matter of is it a chargeable crime or is it not, because the president could theoretically commit all kinds of crimes that could be potentially chargeable. The issue is whether you think that impeachment, as dramatic and all-consuming of a step that is the appropriate mechanism.
So I disagree. I disagree
accountability.
with the premise that the president could conduct himself in a criminal manner regularly while in office. No, the president and nobody. Our system is built on the idea that nobody's above the law. So it's not just that the president could go and sit and commit crimes every day, but it's not a legal standard.
Don, what Crystal gets at is that why this in particular? Bush and his administration led us to war in Iraq and cost this country trillions of dollars, not to mention millions of Iraqi lives and our own soldiers. No impeachment inquiry by the same Speaker of the House of the United States who said that it wouldn't be worth her time and it wouldn't be worth the effort.
A waste of time.
A waste of time. She said it was a waste of time. We got this from Michael in an earlier segment. How do you reconcile that? I mean, why? How does that reconcile?
It's difficult, but we have never put American national security interests and juxtaposed them with. We've never jeopardized our own national security for someone's political interest, right? So for whatever reason, Bush may have thought.
Yeah, but
Bush may have thought. Yeah, it was for the private interest of Halliburton. Yes,
I'm
all
saying,
of that.
I can put my 2006 hat back on.
That's right.
Like I remember what a lot.
That's right.
No war for
that's
oil.
legit.
Yeah, right.
That's legit. But we have never.
Yeah. I was still against it.
I mean, our whole system is based on the idea that our politics are supposed to be separate from the actual policy. What happens when we conduct ourselves with foreign interests and so on and so forth. And we have never been in a situation where our national security was leveraged very specifically against a sitting president's political interest. He's not investigating Cory Booker or Pete Buttigieg. He's investigating Joe Biden specifically,
Michael, what do you, because this is, to me, this is the argument, right? The rule of law argument that Don makes here, that no one should be above the law and we cannot allow the precedent to stand that, the commander-in-chief, the holder of the highest office in the land, can go and squeeze our allies and get them to do his bidding, to dig up dirt on his political opponents, that we simply cannot allow that precedent to stand. What do you say to that?
I say to that, presidents flout the rule of law all the time, and the challenge is to determine what mechanism you're going to use to impose accountability for those floutings of the law. I mean, there's news today about how Trump is withdrawing more troops from Syria on the Turkey border. Do you know that when those troops were first sent in 2014 by President Obama, it was without any congressional authorization, in effect illegal? And Trump continued that and maintained that technically illegal policy, and nobody ever suggested that he should be impeached for that, obviously. So you have to wonder why, again, this episode is regarded as so singularly unique. And you said one thing that I thought was interesting, that the impeachment inquiry provides a platform to bring to light Trump's misdeeds or wrongdoing. Is the media or the Democrats really lacking for a platform to shed light on what Trump has done wrong? Like, do they actually?
They do it every day.
Well, they do it every single day as loudly as possible, to the point that it produces almost a kind of fatigue where you feel as though Democrats can't talk about anything but how awful.
That's true.
Just one second on the rule of law, because this is very important to me, which is that we already live in a fundamentally lawless nation. as in the Federal Trade Commission, the commanding heights of our legal system have been captured by corporate interests in order to selectively enforce law against some and not against others, particularly the oligarchs that live in this country.
Bro, and by no means do you have to explain to me that.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, which is like this whole rule. And it's like, so the entire corrupt political class, including Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and his son, get to walk scot-free as dignified politicians in our system, and then Donald Trump doing what everybody else did in a somewhat more brazen manner is what allows him to be open for impeachment?
This is part of the danger for Democrats in proceeding. Democrats are going, you're giving me a very broad indictment of an entire system and capitalism and so on and so forth. You know, we can read The Wealth of Nations perhaps if you would like. But Democrats are going to have to focus this thing to the Ukrainian phone call and the transcript we saw and the testimony of the two whistleblowers. And if impeachment is to proceed, it can't be about how he angers us with every tweet. It can't be about how every day is so undignified and how the system is so corrupt. It has to be about this particular call, and let's look at that based upon historical precedent and say whether or not we want our president doing this. And if Democrats can limit it and narrow it and make the case for that, then impeachment might be right.
And here's my follow-up question to that. Is that narrowing, is that the strongest ground to stand on? Where we're basically making the case like, yeah, what Biden and Hunter did, sure, it doesn't look great, but that's legal, and his is illegal. I mean, is that parsing of corruption really the strongest place for Democrats to stand? And we're talking about months of coverage here that is going to block out, like, despite the, we can chew gum and walk at the same time, it's going to block out any health care plans, any wage plans, any union plans, any
AOC's
trade plans.
point,
all the above.
It's just going to be on, is his corruption significantly worse than our corruption? Is that the right place to stand?
I think the distinguishing factor is that the president is the president, and that Joe Biden is not, or was not.
He was the vice president.
Even when he was the vice
Heartbeat
president.
away from the
Even when he was the vice president, he was not the president. This is not about Biden and Biden LLP's conduct. This is about what this president did during this phone call and whether or not had this been actually executed to its fullest extent. Let's say he had withheld military support, and what would that have meant in terms of strengthening Putin, who he has done his bidding essentially throughout his presidency? I think, listen, I don't think anybody as a Democrat is very excited about Hunter Biden's activity. I think nobody is very excited to have to explain on the stump Joe Biden and the Ukraine and the energy company. Nobody's excited about all of that. But you cannot conflate that with this very specific
I will
impeachment.
say the great irony in this is, of course, is that Obama didn't grant much of this military aid to Ukraine because he didn't want to start a conflagration with Putin. And so I feel like this whole accusation of Trump, who is the first person who greenlit this aid and then wanting to withhold it, falls within its own policy.
And that's another, that speaks to another reservation I have, which is that, you just kind of made a passing comment that Trump has done Putin's bidding, where the core charge here is that Trump instrumentalized military aid to Ukraine that was ultimately sent, which is one of the last things that you would expect Trump to do if he was doing Putin's bidding. But you're sending lethal weaponry such as anti-tank missiles and snipers.
Was like, no, I'm not.
But into Russia's sphere of influence.
But it's based upon the idea that I could take this if you don't investigate Joe Biden. If you don't bring back some dirt on Joe Biden, I could take this and Russia could take you over.
Okay,
So
a lot of things could happen, but the aid was ultimately sent, and now Putin is not so happy about anti-tank missiles and sniper rifles and grenade launchers going into his backyard.
What about on the political point that you've got a Democratic base that overwhelmingly supports an impeachment inquiry, and the longer that Pelosi sat on this, because clearly she didn't want to go down this path. I mean, I think she should have shut the door more firmly so that you didn't allow this sort of uprising, but we are where we are. She didn't want to go down this path, and she was basically forced into it by the grassroots. What about the political argument that they basically had no choice and would have really de-energized the base if they didn't launch an impeachment inquiry on this or something else?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's a valid argument. Obviously, we can't know for sure because we don't have like an oracle to look into the future. But you could imagine that if the House does impeach and the Senate acquits, it could energize Democrats saying, okay, the only way available to hold Trump accountable now is to defeat him at the ballot box. I could see that plausibly happening. Who knows? But that's sort of separate. I mean, I feel like getting into the muck of these strategic hypotheticals almost obscures what should be the focus, which is the substance. And I worry that how Democrats are framing this, including partially how you did there and Pelosi and others. I mean, if AOC now has problems with that, I mean, she's been screaming for impeachment forever, so I don't really buy that.
But she said impeachment is boring. I find it not interesting.
If you found it so boring, why have you been
to
tweeting about it thousands of times since you got elected? I mean, give me a break.
Don, on the issue though, because you raised in your first comments, you raised this idea that he needs to be held accountable. What is the accountability here? Because ultimately, yeah, the House might vote to impeach him. We all know that Republicans aren't going to convict him in the Senate.
Right.
And what is the accountability if ultimately he's able to say, look, I won?
Yeah. The accountability is a recognition of the idea that we do not live in isolated times. We live against the context of history, and we're making history for going forward. And I'm not trying to wax poetic here, but we need to say that you cannot hold up our national security interests, you cannot hold up finances, you cannot even appear to do this based upon your own personal politics. And presidents of both parties or any party going into the future will know that this is a no-no, this is impeachable conduct. And I think that that matters, right, as opposed to doing nothing. I think that there's a certain urgency as well to having to impeach. Shakespeare talks about treating these two imposters the same. So whether you're a moderate Democrat and you think that this is politically tenuous, and therefore you want to slow walk it, or whether you're a Republican and you say this is nothing, this is a big nothing burger, we shouldn't impeach at all, either way you reach the same outcome of non-impeachment, which is non-accountability. And whether or not on both sides of the political spectrum you get this Rubicon of non-accountability either way, and the imposters become the same. But there's a certain urgency here because you have to remember our national attention span is about 5 minutes. So what if there's a mass shooting? What if there's a natural disaster? What if what if the economy crashes? And then you have to move on to something else. People are no longer paying attention, and you've missed your moment to hold this president accountable for some seriously egregious conduct, whether or not you think it's impeachment worthy.
Final thoughts, Michael.
Well, I'm not a moderate Democrat, and my perspective on this doesn't rise from any sense of kind of misplaced moderation. One of my main criticisms, in fact, is because I think that at least the logic and the rhetoric around the argument for impeachment now, it has a potential to kind of implant militaristic and hawkish premises, such as now it's bipartisan consensus that everybody gloriously agrees upon that military aid to Ukraine in perpetuity is the obviously right thing to do. I mean, we've now been in this impeachment issue for several weeks, and has anybody debated the wisdom of sending military aid to Ukraine? Like, Barack Obama opposed that, and apparently now he has this fringe position.
Well, that's not the point, though. That's not the point. That's very narrow. Yeah. The bigger point here is that whether or not aid to Ukraine is the right thing to do, we definitely don't couch our aid to anywhere based upon your interest, your sole political interest, your singular political interest.
That may be true, but
that is true.
But that's true. In the context of impeachment, you have to take into account a spectrum of political arguments that are being leveled, because as we have agreed, it's not a strictly legalistic process. So if that's something that's going to be at the forefront,
it's not about
it has to be challenged, and it's not.
It's not about Ukraine. It's not about Putin. I took it to Putin. Maybe I shouldn't have. But the principle here, when you look at these things, you have to find out what is the root principle that we're going for. And the root principle is that this president or no president should attach our foreign aid to anywhere based upon your personal politics. Your political interests and the national security, the appropriations of this country should be entirely separate.
I just think that Trump will probably do about 12 things before 8 o'clock tonight that are far more egregious, and nobody cares about it, because it also will probably implicate the Democrats, and they don't want to do anything that would shed light on them.
This one already implicates it.
Yeah,
we are going to have many opportunities to continue to discuss the impeachment inquiry over the coming weeks. But
it should be fun.
Two guys that we really respect their intellect and their principles. Thank you so much for debating this so ably. Really appreciate it. More Rising after this.